If you've ever watched a hockey game in Montreal or scrolled through NHL Twitter during the playoffs, you've probably seen it. Go Habs Go! Chanted in packed arenas, painted on jerseys, screamed by grown adults at 2 in the morning. But here's the thing: nobody actually calls Canadians Habs. Not the country, not the people, just one hockey team, the Montreal Canadiens. So where did this word even come from? Why does an entire city, an entire fan base rally behind a word that sounds like it belongs in a farming manual, not a hockey rink? Stick around, because the answer takes us back over 300 years through French settlers, a media mix-up, and one of the most misunderstood logos in sports. Let's start with the basics. The word Habs is short for habitants. It's a French word. And once you know what it means, the whole story starts to make sense. So let's go back in time, way back. Not to the 1900s, not even to the 1800s. We're going all the way back to the 1600s and 1700s. At that time, there was no Canada the way we know it today. Instead, there was a French colony called New France. It stretched along the St. Lawrence River, in the area we now call Quebec. And in New France, there was a large group of people who worked the land. They grew crops, they raised animals, they built homes with their own hands. They lived simple, hard-working lives season after season, year after year. These people were called habitants. Now, don't overthink the word. It's not fancy, it's not complicated. It simply means inhabitant, or in plain terms, a person who lives somewhere, a settler. Someone who makes a home on the land and lives off what that land gives them. That's it. That's the whole meaning. These habitants were not rich landowners. They were not soldiers marching off to battle. They were not noblemen wearing fine clothes and living in big houses. No, they were ordinary farming families. Mothers, fathers, children, grandparents all working together to survive and build a life in a new land, far from France. And here's something important to understand. These habitants were the backbone of French life in North America. Think of a house. A house needs a strong foundation, or it will fall down. Well, the habitants were like that foundation. They were the everyday people who built the roads, planted the fields, and raised the families that allowed French culture to grow and survive in this new part of the world. Without them, there would be no French-speaking Quebec today, no French-Canadian culture, no French language spoken proudly for hundreds of years in that part of the country. So for many, many generations, if you wanted to describe an everyday rural French-Canadian person, a farmer, a settler, someone connected to the land, you would simply call them a habitant. It became a natural part of the language, a word people used without even thinking twice about it. Just like we might casually say farmer or countryman today. Now here is where this story gets interesting. That word habitant, a term that described 17th century farmers working the fields along a river somehow, 300 years later, ended up being shouted with excitement inside a noisy hockey arena. Think about that for a moment. A quiet word once used to describe a farmer plowing his field eventually became a battle cry, chanted by thousands of fans, cheering on their favorite hockey team. How did that happen? How did a term for hardworking farmers turn into the nickname of one of the most famous hockey teams in the world? Well, that jump from farm fields to the hockey rink didn't happen by accident. It happened because of pride. Pride in culture, pride in identity, pride in being French Canadian. When a hockey team came along that represented the French-speaking people of Montreal, people naturally reached for a word that captured who they were, a word tied to their history, their roots, and their ancestors. And that word was already sitting right there, waiting. Habitant. It wasn't picked out of nowhere. It was picked because it meant something. It connected the team to the very people who built that part of Canada. The farmers, the settlers, the everyday families who came before them. So, when you hear the word Habs today, understand this. It's not just a nickname for a hockey team. It's a word with deep roots. It goes back hundreds of years, long before hockey even existed in Canada. It carries the memory of ordinary people, the habitants who worked the land, raised their families, and built a life in a new world. And in the next part, we'll look at exactly how this old farming word made its way from those quiet fields straight into the roaring crowds of a hockey arena. Now let's fast forward. We're leaving behind the farms and the fields of the 1600s and 1700s. We're jumping ahead, all the way to December 1909. This is where our hockey story really begins. In December 1909, a brand new hockey team was created in Montreal. It was called the Montreal Canadiens. And right from the very start, this was not just another hockey club thrown together for fun. This team had a purpose, a mission, a reason for existing that went far beyond simply playing a game on the ice. The Montreal Canadiens were created specifically to represent the French-speaking people of Montreal, the Francophone community. Now, to understand why that mattered so much, you need to picture Montreal at that time. Back in 1909, Montreal already had hockey teams, but those teams were mostly connected to the English-speaking community, English-speaking owners, English-speaking players, English-speaking fans filling the seats. So imagine being a French-speaking family living in Montreal at that time. You love hockey, your children love hockey, but when you look at the teams playing in your own city, you don't really see yourselves represented. The teams don't speak your language. They don't reflect your culture. They don't feel like they belong to you. That's where the Montreal Canadiens stepped in. This new team was built differently, on purpose. It was designed around French-Canadian identity from the very beginning. The ownership was French. The players were French. And the whole idea behind the team was to give Montreal's Francophone community a hockey club they could truly call their own. This wasn't just about sports. This was about pride, about belonging, about seeing your own culture represented on the ice, in front of the whole city. And here's something important to understand about this time period. Hockey in early 1900s, Montreal was never just entertainment. It wasn't simply a game people watched to pass the time on a Saturday afternoon. No, hockey was deeply tied to language, to culture, and to community pride. When French-speaking fans filled the stands to watch the Canadiens play, they weren't just cheering for goals and wins. They were cheering for something bigger. They were cheering for their own identity, their own language, their own history. And that history stretched back much further than 1909. Remember those habitants we talked about earlier? The farmers and settlers who worked the land along the street? Lawrence River, hundreds of years before this hockey team even existed? Well, the fans supporting the Montreal Canadiens in 1909 were the descendants of those very same people, the sons, daughters, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the original French settlers who built that part of Canada with their own two hands. So when this new hockey team took to the ice, wearing the colors of Montreal's French-speaking community, fans didn't just see hockey players. They saw a living connection to their own roots, a team that represented not just a city, but generations of history. Naturally, people started looking for a nickname, a word that could capture everything this team stood for, something that would sum up their identity in a single, powerful term. And when newspapers, fans, and everyday people searched for that word, they didn't have to look very far. There, sitting quietly in the language and history of Quebec, was the perfect word already waiting for them: habitants. Think about how perfectly that word fit. It didn't just describe a hockey team. It described exactly who these fans were and where they came from. It connected the players on the ice to the farmers of the 1600s and 1700s. It tied modern-day Montreal to centuries of French-Canadian history. This wasn't some random nickname picked out of thin air, the way sports teams sometimes are today. This was different. This nickname carried real meaning, real weight, real history behind every syllable. Calling the team habitants wasn't just giving them a catchy name for headlines and cheers. It was making a statement about identity, a statement about culture, a statement that said, this team belongs to us, this team represents us, this team carries our history. And once that connection was made, once fans and newspapers started calling this hockey club by that name, something powerful had happened. A hockey team had become far more than a hockey team. It had become a symbol of an entire community's pride and identity. In the next part, we'll look at exactly how that word habitants slowly transformed into something shorter, punchier, and easier to shout in a crowded arena. We'll uncover how it became the word every hockey fan knows today: Habs. Now, let's talk about how the word habitants turned into the short, punchy nickname we all know today, Habs. This part of the story takes us back to newspapers, old newspapers, the kind printed on thin paper, sold on street corners, and read by hockey fans who wanted to know how their team had done the night before. The earliest records we have of the team being called habitants in print go all the way back to 1914. Habitants slowly turned into Habs, a word that was faster to say, easier to shout, and simple to print in bold letters across a newspaper headline. But now, here's where the story takes an interesting turn. This is where a myth was born, a myth that many hockey fans believed for decades. In the year 1924, a man named Tex Rickard entered the story. Rickard was the owner of Madison Square Garden, the famous arena in New York City. At some point, Rickard was speaking with a newspaper reporter, and during that conversation, he said something about the Montreal Canadiens' logo. You've probably seen this logo before. It's the big red letter C, with a smaller letter H, placed right in the middle of it. Rickard reportedly told the reporter that this H stood for habitants. That statement got printed, it got repeated, and over time, it spread far and wide. For decades afterward, many hockey fans truly believed this was the honest truth, that the H sitting proudly inside the Canadiens' logo stood for their beloved nickname, habitants, or Habs. But here's the truth. That's not correct. It never was. The full official name of the team, in French, is Le Club de Hockey Canadien. In English, that translates to the Hockey Club of Canada, or you could think of it as the Montreal Canadiens Hockey Club. So that H sitting inside the big red C doesn't stand for habitants at all. It simply stands for the word hockey. That's it. Nothing more mysterious. No hidden meaning. No deep secret. Just a simple, straightforward letter representing the sport itself. But here's what's fascinating about this whole story. By the time people figured out the truth, by the time it became clear that Rickard's statement was simply a mistake, it didn't actually matter anymore. Why? Because the nickname Habs had already taken hold. It was already being used everywhere, in newspapers, in arenas, among fans, young and old, cheering their hearts out for their team. The myth about the logo may have helped spread the word Habs even further and faster than before. But once the nickname caught on, it no longer needed that myth to survive. Habs had become something bigger than a mistaken quote from a man in New York. It had taken on a life of its own, separate from the logo, separate from the mix-up, and separate from Tex Rickard entirely. By this point, Habs wasn't just a nickname anymore. It had become a piece of hockey history, a word tied to identity, pride, and generations of loyal fans. And that word, born from old French farmers, shortened by busy newspaper writers, and boosted by an honest mistake, was here to stay. Now, you might be thinking something reasonable at this point. If the nickname Habs got a big boost from a simple mistake from a man named Tex Rickard saying the wrong thing about a logo, then maybe the whole nickname was a little shaky from the start. Maybe it was just built on confusion. And if that's true, you'd expect it to fade away eventually, right? You'd expect people to stop using it once the truth came out. But that's not what happened. Not even close. Habs didn't survive because of a mix-up about a logo. That mix-up only helped spread the word a little faster in the beginning. The real reason Habs lasted, generation after generation, is much deeper than that. It survived because it meant something real, something true, something that had nothing to do with Tex Rickard or a misunderstood letter on a jersey. Let's think back to where this word truly came from. Remember the habitants? Those hard-working farmers and settlers who lived along the St. Lawrence River, all the way back in the 1600s and 1700s? They were the very first French people to build a life in that part of the world. They cleared the land. They built homes. They raised families. They laid the foundation for everything that came after them. The word Habs ties directly back to those people. It connects modern-day hockey fans sitting in a warm arena, wearing their red jerseys, cheering loudly to those very same farmers and settlers who lived over 300 years earlier. Think about that. Every time someone shouts, "Go Habs, go," they are, in a small way, honoring people who lived centuries before them. People who worked the land with their bare hands, long before hockey rinks, long before Montreal was even the city we know today. That's not a small thing. That's history. That's identity. That's belonging. So even after the myth about the logo was corrected, even after people learned that the H really stood for hockey, not habitants, the nickname Habs didn't lose any of its power. Because it was never really about the logo in the first place. It was about the people, about the roots, about generations of French Canadian history, all wrapped up in one short word. And there's another big reason this nickname never faded. The Montreal Canadiens didn't just carry a meaningful name, they backed it up with results, year after year, decade after decade. Over time, the Canadiens became one of the greatest hockey teams the world has ever seen. In fact, they've won more Stanley Cups than any other team in the entire history of the National Hockey League. Think about that for a moment. More championships than any other team. That's not luck. That's not a lucky streak. That's decades of excellence, hard work, and pride, built up over generations of players and fans. As the team kept winning, kept succeeding, kept making history on the ice, the nickname Habs grew right along with it. It stopped being just a word for a hockey team. It became shorthand, a quick, simple way to say so much at once. Excellence, tradition, Quebec pride, French Canadian identity, all of that packed into one small word. Now, it's worth mentioning, Habs isn't the only nickname the team has ever had. Over the years, you might hear fans use other names too, like Les Glorieux, which means the glorious ones, or La Sainte Flanelle, which is a playful nod to the team's jersey. These nicknames are colorful. They're fun. They carry their own bit of charm and history. But none of them ever caught on the way Habs did. None of them became the one word that everyone, young fans, old fans, French speakers, English speakers, casual fans, and lifelong supporters all use without a second thought. Why? Because Habs has everything a great nickname needs. It's short, it's easy to say, it's easy to shout at the top of your lungs in a crowded arena. But underneath that simplicity, it carries something much bigger, centuries of history, wrapped up in a single, powerful syllable. That's a rare thing for any word to do, to be simple on the surface, yet deeply meaningful underneath. And that's exactly why, after more than 100 years, this little nickname still hasn't gone anywhere. It's not fading. It's not being replaced. It's still alive. Every single time a fan proudly shouts, "Go, Habs, go." In conclusion, next time you hear someone yell, "Go, Habs, go," you'll know exactly what you're hearing. Not just a chant for a hockey team, but a callback to the original French settlers of Canada, filtered through more than 100 years of hockey history, a media legend about a logo that was never even true, and a fan base that turned a term for 17th century farmers into one of the most iconic nicknames in professional sports. It's a small word, but it carries a lot of history. If you enjoyed this one, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos as this. Thanks for watching.